Hi everyone, this is Alyssa Taft for the University of Rhode Island, and the title of my presentation is Privilege and Power, Definitions of Censorship. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we define censorship, why it is dangerous, and why it's a young adult library issue. The American Library Association defines censorship as the suppression of ideas and information that certain persons, individuals, groups, or government officials find objectionable or dangerous. Censorship is an ongoing issue that most librarians will have to face at some point in their career, as it is the nature of our jobs to provide access to information freely and without the suppression of ideas. Censorship can take many forms: the removal of materials from a collection, labeling materials such as placing a sexually explicit label on a book, and segregating materials into a specific area are all forms of censorship. Censorship can also lie in collection development. Not collecting books on specific topics, and even certain weeding practices, if they are done with a personal bias, can be considered forms of censorship. This places censorship into two broad categories: active versus passive censorship. Active censorship is censorship that is visible and more overt, while passive censorship is invisible and not easily identified. The most insidious and dangerous form of passive censorship is self-censorship, in which librarians do not select specific titles due to personal bias or the potential for patron conflict around specific books or subjects. An example of self-censorship would be a librarian not selecting LGBTQ books because of the worry that certain patrons would find the material objectionable. As Jennifer Downey writes, some of the most insidious pressure comes not from external opponents and would-be censors, but from within. Self-censorship is tricky because it's usually invisible. If a library is missing a book, nobody can say for certain why it is missing. The invisible aspect of self-censorship is important because it is difficult to identify something that is lacking or not apparent. It is important to note that it is invisible. All forms of censorship are reliant on power and the power structures that we function within. As Emily Knox writes, in order to censor, one must have the power to do so, since by definition, censorship is the realization of the intimate relationship between knowledge and power. So if censorship is inextricably tied to power and the most dangerous and insidious forms of censorship are invisible, then there are invisible power structures present within library institutions that go undiagnosed and unnoticed. Censorship becomes a form of invisible oppression. How does this relate to young adult library services? Adolescents are at a pivotal point in their development of self-identity, and they often require library collections to help research and/or shape their sense of self. As Jennifer Downey writes, kids who are different have a tough time, and it's tougher when you don't feel supported or can't get the information they need to grow confidently into their identities. Many adolescents deal with difficult issues surrounding their identity, such as sexual orientation, sexual and personal agency, race, social class, religion, gender roles, abuse, confidence, and physicality. If these adolescents do not have access to resources to help support them in creating healthy conceptions of self, then they are being harmed through this lack of resources, whether those resources have been overtly censored or self-censored via a selector. The adolescents, due to a lack of representation and information, are being silenced and censored themselves along with the materials. So the censorship has a dual nature to it, both for the material and for the individual being represented within that material. Being a book selector is a form of privilege. It is a position of power and should be examined and critically analyzed the same way that we examine and critically analyze other forms of privilege, such as white privilege. Because at the end of the day, access to information benefits everyone. This is the job of the library and individual librarians, and it continues to be the job of the librarian to be aware of the definitions of censorship and the visibility of power within the library. Because as Jennifer Downey writes, censorship takes many forms. It can be as obvious as book burning, or as innocuous as simply not knowing where to look.